Today, we're going to demystify something we all get, but let's be honest, very few of us actually understand: the electricity bill. We're going to break down exactly what's behind those numbers.
You know the feeling. Every single month, that bill shows up. But have you ever stopped to think about what you're really paying for? It's not just the power you use, not even close. There's this whole complex world of calculations going on behind the scenes, and today, we're going to pull back that curtain.
So, at the very heart of your bill is one master formula. It's called the Aggregate Revenue Requirement, or ARR for short. And basically, this is the magic number that tells a power utility the total amount of money it's allowed to collect from all of its customers over a whole year. What we're going to do here is build this master formula together, from the ground up, piece by piece. That way you can see exactly how every little part adds up. So let's start with the biggest, most obvious component. It makes sense, right? Before a utility can sell you any electricity, it has to go out and buy that power from the people who generate it. This is by far the single biggest cost component, and it all starts with one simple thing: how much power we all actually use. So our first building block is called energy sales. It's pretty straightforward. It's just the total amount of electricity sold to everybody: homes, businesses, factories, you name it. The more we all use, the more the utility has to buy. Simple cause and effect. But they actually have to buy even more than we use. And that brings us to something called distribution loss. The easiest way to think about the power grid is like a huge system of leaky water pipes. Some of the electricity is just always going to get lost on its way to you. Now, regulators set a target for this leakage. And here's the important part: if the utility loses more than that target, they have to eat the cost. That loss doesn't get passed on to you, which is a key protection for consumers. So here's the crucial takeaway. When you add up the cost of buying all the power we need, plus the cost of covering those acceptable network losses, you get the biggest chunk of the entire bill. We're talking more than half of the total money the utility needs to collect. It's huge. Okay, so we've got the power. But how does it actually get from the power plant to your house? Well, that brings us to our next major component: the cost of all the physical stuff. The poles, the wires, the transformers, the whole shebang. And this introduces a super important concept: gross fixed assets, or GFA. This is basically the total price tag of all the physical gear the utility owns, based on what it cost when it was built. Now, why is this number so important? Because GFA is what we call a parent variable. Its value is used to calculate 4 other major costs that eventually land on your bill. So how does that work? How can one number create 4 different costs? Well, the total value of the GFA directly decides 4 other line items: the annual depreciation of the equipment, the budget for repairs and maintenance, the interest the utility can claim on loans it took out to build things, and the profit it pays to its investors. Yep, one number, 4 different costs. So, how are that interest and profit actually calculated? Well, to keep things simple and fair, regulators don't dig into the utility's actual real-life financing. Instead, they just apply a standard rule called a normative split. They assume that all the infrastructure was paid for with 70% debt, like a loan, and 30% investor money, or equity. And here's exactly how that 70-30 split gets used. Regulators take 70% of the total asset value to figure out the allowable interest payments on debt. And they use the other 30% of the asset value to calculate the allowable profit, or what's called return on equity, that goes back to the company's shareholders. But here's a really critical detail, and it's all about fairness. Let's say part of the grid was paid for directly by you through a consumer contribution, or maybe a government grant. Well, the utility is not allowed to earn interest or profit on that money. That amount gets deducted from the GFA first. It's a net-off effect that makes sure the utility only earns a return on the stuff it actually paid for itself. All right, so we have the costs of the power itself, and we have the cost to the infrastructure to deliver it. Next up are the day-to-day running costs, paying salaries, keeping the offices open, and just managing the whole business. So how much can these operational costs go up each year? It's tied to inflation, as you might guess, but it's not just the regular consumer inflation that we all see in the news. Regulators use a special blended index. 55% of it comes from the consumer price index, what it costs us, and 45% comes from the wholesale price index, which reflects industrial costs. These are the main parts of what's called O&M, or operations and maintenance expenses. Things like employees' salaries and administrative costs are allowed to grow based on that special inflation index we just talked about. But repair and maintenance, well, as we saw a minute ago, that's linked back to the value of the GFA. Then you've got things like pensions, which are usually just based on actual costs. Okay, we have covered the cost of power, the cost of the grid, and the cost of actually running the company. It is time. Let's put all of our building blocks together and finally reveal the master formula. And this brings us right back to our master concept, the Aggregate Revenue Requirement, or ARR. This one number represents the grand total of every single approved cost. It's the total amount of money the utility is officially allowed to collect from all of us for the entire year. And here it is, the formula in its final form. You can see all the parts we've talked about: the power cost, O&M, depreciation, interest, and return on equity. You'll also see a small charge for interest on working capital. That's just the cost of funding day-to-day operations. And finally, notice that last part, non-tariff income, which is money from things like late fees, actually gets subtracted. That helps lower the final amount for everyone. So now we have the total money needed, the ARR. But what happens if that new number is higher than what the utility would collect with the prices that are currently in place? Well, that difference is called the revenue gap. When there's a gap, regulators have basically three main choices. Option 1, just increase the tariffs right now to cover the shortfall. Option 2, create something called a regulatory asset, which is a fancy way of saying they'll kick the can down the road and plan to get that money from customers in future years. Or Option 3, the government can step in with a subsidy to cover it. So we've built the formula from scratch. Now let's just quickly boil it all down. What does this all really mean for you? What are the key things that have the biggest impact on the final bill you have to pay? Let's just quickly review the main drivers. If inflation is higher, that directly pushes up the operational costs. If the utility spends more money, that's CAPEX, on new infrastructure, the GFA goes up, and that pulls up those 4 other related costs with it. And of course, if those leaky pipes get even leakier, the utility has to buy more power, which increases the single biggest cost in the entire formula. So there you have it, the machine and all of its moving parts. And now that you know the formula, seeing how the asset base, inflation, and those efficiency targets all fit together, it raises a really big question, doesn't it? To make electricity fair and affordable for everybody, where in this complex formula should we really be focusing our attention? That's the real challenge for regulators, utilities, and all of us.